Hello and good afternoon, everybody. I am Logan here with the Log Show on this beautiful Tuesday, December 3rd. Here to talk about everything going on in the sports world, especially NFL, college football, UFC. We have so much coming up this week. Obviously, in the world of college football, you have the conference championships coming up this week. A lot of those games very important for this new 12-team college football playoff ranking that we have going into this postseason. The NFL, we just got done with NFL. Excuse me. We just got done with NFL Week 13, which was an absolute blast. Obviously, more games happened earlier than usual on this beautiful Week 13 with Thanksgiving. Black Friday games are now a thing. So we did not have as much football on Sunday specifically, but still a lot of football this week. A lot of good football, too. I'm not going to lie. A lot of football that I personally enjoyed. Sorry that I seem a little delayed here. I am just trying to make sure that we are all good here on radio. I believe we are, though. I don't see why we wouldn't. But yeah, Week 13 was an absolute blast. Obviously, on Thanksgiving, we had a lot happen. We had that Bears game, which was very, very interesting. I'll talk about that. Not only did we have that fum, uh, Bears, fumble rooski, I guess we could call it, type loss. Or I don't want to call it a fumble rooski, I guess. That's not the right words for it, but you know what I mean. We have that Bears blunder that leads to the Eberflus firing on Thanksgiving. Not only that, a lot of Thanksgiving was actually really interesting. We had the Giants Cowboys game, which ended up being a lot more interesting than I think people expected for two teams that are not doing very good. And then to end the night, we had the Dolphins, who they felt like they were very prepared for the cold weather. They came in. Mike McDaniel said he was throwing ice at the people. Um, they came in with they flew in with the Tom Brady approved scuba suits and all of that, but none of it proved to be enough as they got defeated on Thanksgiving as well. um yeah, I mean, I'll start with Thanksgiving and I'll get into it there. I'll just honestly just get into it, start with the NFL today, instead of starting with college football. That Bears loss is really bad, man. I mean, you look at what has happened for the Bears going into this game, even before this game, right? Going into this game, you look at what has happened to the Bears. You have week 12 versus the Vikings where you lose off the blocked field goal, where you were trying to force overtime. You have week 11 against the Packers where you lose off the blocked field goal to try to win the game. You lose to the Patriots at home. You haven't won since your bye week. Going into that bye week, going into that heartbreaking loss that they had coming out of the bye week in Washington. You have just such an interesting situation where, like, if they come out of that loss, they come out of that game with a win. They're at 5-2 going into week 9. But instead, you have this huge heartbreaking loss that clearly has taken such a big effect on your team because you haven't won since it happened. Like, they just haven't won since week 8, and they've lost in very, very, very ugly ways, if you know what I'm saying. It's just like, uh, obviously, I think with the way that they lost on Thursday, you had to fire Eberflus. Like, I can't sit here and find one solid argument, one solid defense for Matt Eberflus after what happened there, like after that play. You know what I'm saying? It's just like he very much, at the end of the day, I do want to start with this. Caleb Williams is not just get to be ignored in the blame for that play that happened last Thursday. Now, don't get me wrong. Most of the blame falls on Matt Eberflus because of the because he's the head coach at the end of the day, because Eberflus has this be all end all decision. Yeah, the decision 110% falls on Matt Eberflus, and him being fired kind of had to happen. Um, but I think Caleb can't be left in the open here. You know, you have that play, you have the sack on third down that happens on that play. From the point where the Lions defensive end, whoever it was that gets the sack, that I can't remember who it was off the top of my head, but whoever it was gets the sack. He celebrates. From the moment he starts celebrating, there are 34 seconds on the clock. For you to tell me that in 36 seconds you got one playoff is ridiculous. And it wasn't even like a field goal try when you had a timeout left on the board. It's just not a good situation. It was just an ugly, ugly, ugly situation. And there's just, I mean, obviously, right now, I feel like I'm just stating the obvious that everybody knows about this play, but I just can't. It's just such a bad thing for the Bears because, like I was saying, the Bears have just suffered ugly loss after ugly loss after ugly loss this season, and it's really, really rough for them. It's really rough for Caleb. It's really rough for everything I've seen down there. Now, after the Packers loss, especially after the Minnesota loss, I think the Eberflus firing was at some point written on the wall. I feel like a lot of people know that. I don't feel like I'm this football genius for saying that the Eberflus firing really after the Green Bay loss. You know what I mean? After that heartbreaking Green Bay loss, you have now lost 4 straight, 2 of them in a heartbreaking fashion. You know what I mean? You lost to a Patriots team at home where you only scored 3 points. Um, and then you lose to a rival team like that. I think it was very much warranted and very much um it was very much warranted, the firing, but I do think a lot of decisions that were made by the Bears were interesting. Like they trotted him out for a press conference after the game. I think the front office knew they were firing him, putting him in a press conference on, I think it was actually Friday because they made the decision on Saturday, or they made a decision Friday night. So I think it was either Friday afternoon or Thursday night. They trot him out for a press conference when they know the decision's coming. So having Eberflus almost look like an idiot, I think shows the way that the Bears are set up as, this. They're not. They're, I don't know, man. That was bad. That was really bad, man. Like I'm just trying to sit here and think about what happened, and it's just like that was such poor clock management. I could argue even if that doesn't happen, that ending that game that close of a game with a timeout remaining as the losing team is enough said. I think that alone is enough said. But not only that, you run that hurry up offense, you don't call the timeout, you chuck it deep. You know, that's the sad part there. And that's why I was trying to say that all the blame isn't just passed off of Caleb Williams. It's not just all Caleb Williams is scot free here. Because Caleb Williams, you know what I mean? They were set with 9 seconds left. And I watched Caleb Williams go, fix his glove. So I think Eberflus firing is just is letting everyone ignore the fact that Caleb Williams is not in the clear on that play. That was a very, very bad rookie mistake. A very unaware play by Caleb Williams in a situation where he was usually bailed out by head coaches in the past. He was bailed out by Lane Kiffin in the past, in those past situations back in college, if he was ever in those. So, like that, That worries me going forward for Caleb Williams. I'll be completely honest. The fact that Caleb Williams was that unaware in that situation, not to not call the timeout, because that's the part that I think everyone knows is obviously you call the timeout. But for Caleb Williams to come up to the line and take his time with the snap is arguably worse than not calling the timeout. Because there's a chance that, all right, maybe Eberflus makes a mistake and miscounted his timeouts and thought they had a time and thought they were out of timeouts. Maybe there's that situation. You know what I mean? There's situations where I could argue, I could see a arguable oddball situation where the timeout is maybe not called. But to say that Caleb is just in the clear here, there is time to, like there is time to get the playoff. And I see you sharpshooter in the chat. Shout out whoever that is in the chat. But like I see you there, and I'm not saying that it's all on Caleb. But I'm saying that we can't ignore Caleb's part in it, if you get what I mean there. You can't ignore the fact that the Bears were set with like 10 seconds remaining. It doesn't take 10 seconds to run a play unless you take your time to take the snap and you take your time to throw the ball downfield. I could see in a way, in a very bizarre way, if I'm going to sit here and play devil's advocate, I could see that Eberflus doesn't call the timeout before that snap because he thinks that Caleb's going to just snap the ball. You're going to get 5 yards on a short route, call the timeout with 2 seconds left, and then kick a easier field goal than a 56-yarder. Now, where the full blame at the end of the day is on Eberflus is when you see Caleb taking his time. Eberflus has the opportunity to still call that timeout while Caleb is lost in his own world. That's where, at the end of the day, the fault is Eberflus's overall. Because he can call that timeout still. But I don't see where we're just ignoring the fact that Caleb Williams made a very bad mistake as a rookie quarterback. We are. It's just, and he has done so a lot this year. I think it's been ignored. No, yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Sharpshooter is as soon as Eberflus realizes that they weren't going to get the snap off and that was going to be the final snap, you have the opportunity to call a timeout. That's why the firing is completely justified. The decision to fire him is completely correct. Because of that, because at the end of the day, yeah, when Caleb is sitting there fixing his glove and doing all that, that is completely true, and I completely agree with that. When Caleb is sitting there and doing all that, Eberflus still has the opportunity to call that timeout and look at Caleb Williams and being like, bro, what the hell were you doing right there? I thought we could get a playoff. Now we got to kick a 56-yarder. I agree with that. And I think there's been a lot written on the wall with Eberflus over the past season, with last year and this year. I don't think he's the best for the development of Caleb, but also I think, I don't know. This puts the Bears in a weird spot. They've lost now, what is it, 7 straight? If I have the number right, 6 straight? Yeah, it's 6 straight. I apologize. They've lost 6 straight now. So it's hard to see a situation where obviously Eberflus ended the season. But I think that play is a microcosm for the Bears franchise right now. Just like how I said, when I talk about the Giants, that whole Saquon situation is a very big telltale sign on how the franchise is ran. I think not Eberflus. I think Eberflus getting fired is the right decision, but I think the Bears making him stand up there also after the game and look like an idiot first, when it was very clear that after that game, Matt Eberflus is getting fired. Especially with the Bears making that decision when they did. I mean, the news came out Friday morning. It was like 11:30, and I saw it on I saw it on my Twitter feed, Eastern time. So that means it's 10:30 in Chicago in the morning when they called Eberflus and they released it to the public that Matt Eberflus was relieved of his duties. So that so as a PR team to trot him out there and make him look like an idiot beforehand, I feel like is completely stupid, like ridiculously stupid. But that's the Bears, right? The Bears, the Bears. Who do they play this week? I feel like they have a divisional game this week. They play in San Francisco this week. That's a team that's interesting too, man. San Francisco. I mean, San Francisco now they're in a weird spot too with the whole CMC is clearly done for the year. San Francisco is sitting at currently there's currently they're sitting at 5-7. And it just hasn't seemed to click. I mean, they've lost three straight. They've played three good teams, but none of the only game that was close was the Seattle game where they lost by 3 off that Geno Smith touchdown run at the end of the game there. The Packer game in Green Bay, they have back-to-back snow games, which I guess you could attribute that to the struggles over the past 2 weeks. Also, the lack of uh just production. It seems like out of Brock Purdy, like I don't know, man. I mean, I know against Green Bay they didn't have Brock Purdy, which is one thing that goes into it. So like that attributes to at least like that's why you could say they got smacked in Green Bay. Um, I mean that game I missed. I didn't miss the Buffalo game this week. I did miss the Packer game on Sunday night last week. Um, but against the Bills this week, I mean, maybe like I said, you could attribute it to the snow, but I don't feel like they looked much better than they have all year. Yeah, you have Christian McCaffrey go down in the second quarter, which obviously plays an effect. Yes, you're playing in um the snow, which the 49ers, obviously being in San Francisco, are gonna struggle with, but they just didn't and all year they just offensively they've just looked very mundane, very slow. It hasn't seemed like everything's clicking. Like you look at these stats right here. I mean, again, it was a snow game, so I don't want to take the past stats for like verbatim. You know what I mean? With Brock Purdy only having 94 yards, but you just compare it to what the 49ers were able to do last year. You know, Brock Purdy was top of the league in passing yards last year. Took care of the ball a lot more last year, but he's got 8 interceptions this year. Um, Multiple games with or had 3 of them against Kansas City. So like I don't know. You could argue that it's their strength of schedule because they are up there with strength of schedule. I don't know the exact ranking that they have, but I mean everybody knows how the years come out. So like when I just look down the schedule, they played a red hot Vikings team in week 2. They played a hot Cardinals team in week 5. You play the Chiefs in week 7. You know what I'm saying? So you play the Packers a couple weeks ago. So they do have a decently difficult schedule, but to see them struggling this hard, I mean, just being riddled with injuries, it's rough to see. The way that this NFC West is turning out is real interesting because you have Seattle at the top at 7-5, Arizona and LA both in the middle at 6-6, and then San Francisco at the bottom at 5-7. So this is not by any means a set division. The only reason, like, all of them also have 2 division games left remaining. You know what I'm saying? San Francisco plays the Rams week 15, Cardinals to end the year. The Cardinals play Seattle this week, and then San Francisco to end the year. The Rams play San Francisco in 2 weeks, and then Seattle to, like I just said, San Francisco in 2 weeks. Then they play Seattle to end the year. And then who am I? Seattle. Seattle plays Arizona this week, like I just said, and the Rams end the year. So they all have 2 division games left remaining. So this is by all means, this is very much an up for grabs division. To see where this goes is so interesting. But this 49ers team is just so riddled with injuries. They play a Bears team that I was just talking about this week. So to see how that goes is really interesting. I mean, we're only on Tuesday. Hopefully, Eric will be here on Thursday. I don't know, but shout out Eric. But maybe he will, and we'll talk about next week to see when the injury reports come out, stuff like that. I don't have any of those yet because it is only Tuesday. But yeah, this San Francisco team's interesting to look at going forward. Uh, ooh, ooh. Sorry, guys. I didn't have like a set list of where I was going to go today. I kind of just wrote it all down in a jumble of what I wanted to talk about. I didn't really have a good transition for the Niners. The Niners weren't even on my list to talk about. I kind of just wanted to talk about because that's an interesting spot. Like I said, they're injured, but they could easily go on a run to end this year and win a division here. Which wouldn't be surprising. You know what I mean? You have Seattle, who has a really hard remaining schedule. Arizona probably has the easiest remaining schedule out of all of them. So I don't know. Speaking of Arizona, they just actually lost to Minnesota. That's a big win. That's a huge win for Minnesota and a huge loss for Arizona. Because we were just talking about Arizona. That technically moves Arizona down to, I think they still might be second. Because if I look at their schedule, I remember they beat the Rams earlier this year. So they have that tiebreaker over the Rams. They played them in week 2. So they are technically second in their division right now, but a bad loss to Minnesota last week in a big game. You know, you lose by 1 point there. Just the way that game ends too for for Arizona with, I don't know how it happens week in and week out, but a great play on a 4th down for uh not Shaquem, one of the Griffin brothers makes a great play. Excuse me there. Makes a great play on the ball intended for Marvin Harrison, and just it's again a really tough loss for Arizona. I mean, you're down at your own 30. You got time left. You know, to throw that interception is rough there for Kyler Murray, and it's a really, 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 really tough loss for Arizona going into the end of the year. With, like I said, this NFC West is up for grabs, man, and the way the Cardinals have been playing, the way the Seahawks have been playing, and then with the 49ers at the end of it having the playoff experience, any of those teams could be scary going forward coming to the postseason, 110%. And then when it comes to the other side, the team that won that game, Minnesota, the NFC North, excuse me, is absolutely ridiculously good. The NFC North has 3 teams with 9 or more wins. You have the Lions at 11. You have the Lions at 11-1. You have Minnesota at 10-2, and then the Packers at 9-3. And all 3 of them play each other. I apologize for that. I thought Detroit played Minnesota. That series is over. So that's where I had that wrong. Minnesota does not play. No, they do. They do. I was correct. Yeah. So all 3 of them play each other again as well, which is the best part of this. You have Minnesota plays Green Bay and Detroit in back-to-back games in week 17 and 18, which are practical. Like, that's what's so crazy about this NFC North that I can't wait for, man. This NFC North, the way that this NFC North is going to end up, I cannot wait to see how this ends up with the Packers rolling and the way that the scheduling wise, it coming down to week 17, Minnesota plays the Packers. Week 18, Minnesota plays Detroit. You have the Packers, they play Detroit this week. So you you see what I'm saying there? Because as of right now, Detroit's one loss is, I'm blanking on who it is. The Bucks in week 2. But when they played the Packers and Green Bay, they got a big win, and they've just been rolling. That's on Thursday night too. That game. That's a Thursday night game this week. That one is going to be good, man. You got it. That game is going to be big, and if the Packers can get a win there, you know what I mean. You push Detroit back to 11-2. Minnesota hypothetically is probably going to beat Atlanta this week. We'll get into that later this week. But you know what I'm saying? You have Minnesota playing Atlanta this week, so that's a good. We could be looking at going into Green Bay, going into the Minnesota Green Bay game in Minnesota. We could have all three of those teams at a similar, if not the same record. Going into Minnesota at Detroit, Minnesota at Detroit. I apologize. I just was trying to figure out who was on the road there because I had it written down wrong. Going in to Minnesota at Detroit in Week 18, there's a chance that all three teams in the NFC North are 3-loss teams after that game. Because if Minnesota, right? Oh, no, there's not. Never mind, because Minnesota has to play Green Bay again. But still, you could have, hypothetically, you could have such a cool end. You could have such a crazy ending for this division looking at their remaining schedules and everything. That is a division to look forward to. Is Jordan Love, Sam Darnold, Jared Goff, and the way that those defenses have been rolling. You have Xavier McKinney in Green Bay, who's arguably defensive player of the year. You have the way the Minnesota defense is playing. Everyone in Detroit. Detroit's at 11-1, and you could argue that their defense is riddled with injuries. They have no Aiden Hutchinson. They're missing a lot of pieces there in Detroit as well. So just to see the way that this NFC North could scratch up and just could be crazy. Shout out Sir Doogie. How you doing, bro? How you doing? But you got like the way that Detroit could really just end up and push that whole NFC North, man, could be crazy interesting and crazy, crazy fun to watch going forward here. The next thing I want to talk about really a lot is on the other side. It has to do with the AFC. I really wanted to talk about this, and as I see, we hit 4:30, so we only have a half hour left. I want to make sure that I talk about this as a point. The Al-Shazir hit, Aziz Al-Shahir hit on Trevor Lawrence. How do I say this? It's a hit you never want to see. But I was listening to Bill Belichick yesterday talk to Pat McAfee. And Bill Belichick brought up a very good point. That it has gotten to a point, arguably, that when does it become telling a quarterback to slide is just as, I will never say it's more dangerous. It will never be more dangerous. But it's just as dangerous as maybe taking the hit on the play. Certain hits. On a play like what happened with Aziz Al-Shahir, do I think it's a play that we never want to see in the NFL? 110%. I think it is a play that we never want to see happen in the sport of football. Is it a play that is terrible to see? Yes. Is it a play that is at fault of Aziz Al-Shahir? Yes. But I don't know. Like, ah, it's terrible to see. What I'm trying to say is, I don't think Aziz Al Shair is dirty for them. I don't think that. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to say that Trevor Lawrence shouldn't have slid or anything like that. I think quarterbacks obviously always should protect themselves. But I don't think Aziz Al Shair is necessarily a super dirty player for what happened on that play. I think the forearm was unnecessary 110%. I think there's parts of you know, but I also think football happens at full speed. I don't think he intended. I do think that his decision to hit Trevor Lawrence was made before Trevor Lawrence was given up. But so that's my big thing here is I really don't want to sit here and say that Aziz Al Shair is a dirty player. But it was a terrible hit to see, and I hope that Trevor Lawrence does have a speedy recovery. It sucks to see, like I said, you never want to see, especially when the forearm gets thrown in. That's where you have the argument that it's a dirty hit. Al Shair does have a couple pass fines for like, I think he had a late hit last year. He's been in a couple of fights before on the field, but to me, he's not someone who I've ever clocked as someone who's a dirty player. And there's a couple of them across the league, but he's not someone I've ever clocked to as really um this dirty player. So I don't think the hit was necessarily super intentional. I don't think it was warranted. But you know what I mean? You hate to see it. Trevor Lawrence, he just came back from a shoulder injury. You could argue whether he was supposed to be on the field or not in the first place with the way the Jags season has been going, but just terrible to see. Um, if I'm Jacksonville, I shut him down for the season. Just end it where it is. I don't see a reason to bring him back. Just run with Mac Jones, end the year, and call it as it is. Just call it as it is, man. Man, yeah. For Houston too, you have Al Shair. That's a 3-game suspension that he just ended up with. 3-game suspension he just ended up with today, and that's a big 3 games that Houston has coming up. As I get into this talk about the playoff picture that I want to start, I'll start with Houston, talking about that with the 3-game suspension, not a 3-week suspension, a 3-game suspension. The reason that is big to note is because Houston has a bye week this week, so Al Shair is not going to come back until the game against Baltimore or against their final game against Tennessee if this is upheld. If the suspension is upheld to 3 games, Al Shair will not return until their final game this year, and that's their defensive captain, so that'll be big. In a playoff picture in the AFC that's really heating up, man. You got Pittsburgh at 9-3, but they still have to play Philly. They play Cleveland this week, but then after that they got to play Philly, Baltimore, Kansas City, Cincinnati. You have Houston, who has Miami, Kansas City, Baltimore. Um, Baltimore, who has Pittsburgh, Houston, like we just said, and they end the year against Cleveland. His playoff picture's heating up, man. You got KC, Buffalo. Shout out them. They both end the year in, or they both have clinched a playoff spot officially. So shout out to them. But you got Denver at 8-5 right now in the wild card spot too. That's real interesting to see what Bo Nix and Sean Payton have been able to do down there. They've been really clicking as of late. Started the season off very slow, but seemed to, especially after that game against New Orleans, really start clicking together and getting everything in shape in place that they've wanted to do. They've been able to squeeze in, and you just see such a drop off here. I mean, looking at these teams that are outside of the playoffs, you have maybe Miami can make a push here, especially with them playing them playing Houston. You have Indianapolis who can maybe make a push here because they have an easy schedule, and Houston has such a tough schedule. So AFC playoff picture is very interesting. The NFC playoff picture, I will be honest, outside of the NFC West, I think is pretty set. I think 2 of the wild card teams are going to be the 2 NFC North teams that don't win the division. Um, I think the other wild card team is going to be either Washington or Philadelphia, whoever wins that division. So where you really have the big drama in the NFC is the NFC West. I think everyone outside of that is in the playoffs right now will probably make the playoffs. It's just dependent on seeding, whether Minnesota could steal a 1 seed, Philly could steal a 1 seed, whether Washington could steal that division. I think that's where that all comes in. But sorry to Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay is the only team there in the NFC South I see obviously being able to make a push against Atlanta, but I don't think that one's interesting. I honestly think that uh, neither of those teams, I'll be honest, it sucks to say this, but neither of those teams, even at home, I'd rather see Tampa Bay in the playoffs, honestly. I think Tampa Bay has a better chance of upsetting someone in the playoffs than, uh, like, especially in Tampa Bay, than Atlanta does. I think Tampa Bay in the playoffs, they could upset a Minnesota or a Green Bay. Unlike, I don't know if Atlanta and Kirk Cousins can do that. I think they're by far the worst team in the playoffs. By far. I think they're worse than Seattle. I think they're worse than the Chargers. I think they are by far the worst team in the playoffs. Shout out the AFC West. They might have 3 teams in the playoffs too. I just realized that with Denver squeezing in and the Jim Harbaugh and the Chargers clicking up out there. Wow, I keep saying today. I think it's because my dad called me earlier and said don't say that it's making me now say more. So what the hell, Dad? What I did want to talk about though, not the playoff picture that is heating up. The NFL is not the playoff picture that is heating up as of the moment. It is starting to, as we come to season's end with the NFL. We are starting for the playoff picture to heat up. But there's a playoff picture that is on fire right now. It's not just heating up. We're not in the brewing of it. It is on fire right now. And that is going into conference championship week. I believe this week. Do I have that wrong? When is conference champ? When is because I know what throws in there. What always throws me off is Army Navy gets thrown in there at some point. So all right, it is this weekend. All right, I was correct. It goes, and then Army Navy happens. Okay. Uh, but yeah, college football, man. This one is real interesting. Where you have right now, looking at what's going on. As of right now, I have the bracket up on my paper, based off the AP polls. That's all it's based. It's based off the AP polls. What I have. You have Oregon at 1. This is the seeding. All right. So you have to remember this about the college football playoff seeding. The seeding works where the top 4 conferences are conference winners. It's not the top 4 people in the country. It's the top 4 conference winners, and then the seeding is then filled in as vice versa as of top from them point on with the at-large bids they're called. Right now, you have Oregon at number 1, Texas at number 2. You have SMU at the 3 seed if they win the ACC, which they're expected to do. Boise, if they get that win in the Mountain West championship, they will be the 4 seed. And then you have Penn State at 5. Even if they do lose to Oregon, I believe a 2-loss Penn State team is not going to move from where they are, especially with their second loss being Oregon. You have Notre Dame at 6, Georgia at 7, Ohio State at 8, Tennessee at 9, Indiana 10, Miami 11, ASU 12. That is what the AP has the prediction of the college football playoffs as of the moment, the AP. Now, the actual college football rankings come out tonight, I believe, at 9 o'clock. This is what I really want to highlight about Conference Championship Weekend, which is very, very interesting. There are 3 huge games that will shake up how how next week's college football playoff is really set. Now, going into tonight, based off last week, I'm actually going to save that now that I think about it with the time. I'm not going to talk about next week right now. I'm not going to talk about college football. I'm not going to talk about the conference championships. I'm going to talk about last week and what I think is going to happen tonight. What I think is happening tonight, realistically, is I think Ohio State, like I said, like the AP did, I can't see them staying within the top 5. I think it's very hard losing to the Michigan team that they lost to in the fashion that they did. Ryan Day now losing 4 straight games to Michigan. I find it hard for Ohio State to maybe they're at 5, but I find it hard for them to be a top 5 team right now. My top 5 as of the moment, not saying ranking or not saying seeding, top 5 rankings. I have Oregon at 1, Texas at 2, Penn State at 3. Actually, in my opinion, I think Notre Dame is 3. I have Penn State at 4, and personally, I have Georgia at 5. I think Georgia football is very good. I think this year they're very good. They lost to a very good Ole Miss team, and the other loss, I believe, is to Alabama, who's also a very good football program, even though they have some bad losses. Now, where you look at the rest of the top 25, I think is where you get interesting. Where you look at the rest of the college football playoff, I think is where you get really interesting. I don't know. I don't love Miami getting in with their 2 losses being Georgia Tech and Syracuse. I'm not a big fan of that, but arguing that they should, like, that's what's weird. This is where it gets weird. Is obviously I know everyone loves SEC bias. Everyone says SEC bias this, SEC bias that. It is hard for me to argue that a 2-loss Miami team has won better games than a 3-loss Alabama team. I'm serious. Or a 3-loss, even like Ole Miss. Like those SEC 3-loss teams that are playing each other, Ole Miss beat Georgia. Like you have Ole Miss, like I'm a huge Cam Ward fan too. Like I like what they're doing down there in Miami, but I do find it very hard to argue with the 2 losses that Miami has that they deserve to be in this playoff. I think you run into a really odd situation if SMU doesn't win the ACC. If you have Clemson win this ACC, I think you run into a very odd situation where maybe you have ASU or Iowa State as the Big 12 champion, and you don't have a Power 4 conference champion in your having a bye week. I think that would say something about how important a conference championship is, because I don't think Clemson's that good. Now, if they win, like, that's again an argument. You're gonna sit here like the ACC puts you in a weird spot where this ends up. Obviously, if the Mountain West, Boise State, shout out Genty, shout out what they're doing over there. But based off what happened last week with Indiana, who's a 1-loss Big Ten team, Notre Dame, I don't see Oregon beating. I don't see Penn State beating Oregon. They don't win big games. Texas, Georgia's one to look forward to. Every other conference championship game is one to look forward to, especially with the top 5 being out according to the AP right now, being Alabama, Iowa State, Clemson, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. You also have BYU on the outside right there, but don't even have a chance for a conference championship. It's the same thing with Colorado, so I don't see that happening. But it's just this conference championship week is going to be so big, and I want to talk about what we could see happening with someone else here. So that's why I want to save that for Thursday with Eric. But those conference championship matchups are very interesting. See where college football is very interesting. See what the committee does tonight is a big thing, and I think everyone should look forward to it. Last thing I would like to talk about today has nothing to do with the sport of football. It has to do with my other favorite sport, and that is the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Coming off of one of the highest selling events that they have had in a long time, UFC 309, that was at Madison Square Garden featuring Johnny Bones Jones. We now go into UFC 310, a card that was definitely shaken up, but a card that is interesting to say the least. I think this card is going to be an absolute banger. Just looking at the main card right now, again, looking at it, I don't see how this card is not an absolute banger, even with Bilal Muhammad stepping out of that main event, and we're like, I think I like the fight better that we're getting than the Shagfat fight against Bilal Muhammad. I like him versus Machado Gary so much better. They have such similar wins, such similar ways up in the ranking. Also on these prelims that I forgot, I never checked the prelims for this fight. You have Aljo on the prelims, you have Vincent Luque on the prelims, and you have Dominic Reyes versus Anthony Smith on the prelims. So this card's an absolute banger. You have Bryce Missile versus Kron Gacy, one of the Gracies. One of the, you know what I mean? Obviously, you have Hendo and all those OGs in the sport. Then you have Cyril Gahn versus Alexander Volkov. Both of them coming off. Last time we saw Cyril Gahn fight was his fight against John Jones, if I remember correctly, where he ended up, losing in pretty bad fashion. And then, oh no, he fought in September last year and beat Spivak. I did not see that fight. And then you have Alexander Volkov, who his last fight was against Pavlovich, where he was able to get that win after Pavlovich lost to Tommy Aspinall. Tommy Aspinall. You know what I'm saying? So you have that situation there. You have that fight there, which should be an absolute banger. I like Volkov in that fight. Then you got the co-main event of Shakhmat Rakhmonov, there we go, versus Ian Machado Gary, 18-0 versus 15-0. Both, like I said, have very similar wins in the UFC. What is going to happen between these two is going to be extremely, extremely exciting. One of them is going to suffer their first loss. I was talking to someone about it earlier. The way that, I'm like, well, Shavkat could just wrestle him, but Ian, his boxing is so good. His takedown defenses are so good that I think this is a shoo-in for fight of the night. And then to end the night main event, we have flyweight champion Alexandre Pantoja, who I love, fighting Kai Asakura in his UFC debut. Kai Asakura, someone who used to fight, I believe it was in one championship, was a Risen. Sorry, he fought in Risen Championship over in Japan, was a two-time champion over there, ends up coming to the UFC at 12-4. I have Asakura coming over and taking the UFC by storm. I can't wait to watch it. And yeah, when it comes to what I wanted to talk about, that's all I have for you guys today. I do want to end it on one note. We did over here at St. John's lose a absolute legend, a family member of the St. John's basketball program, was lost this weekend. Rest in peace, former St. John's head coach, legendary St. John's head coach, the man who put the school on the basketball program on the map. Rest in peace, Lou Carnesecca, a man who made the Elite Eight in '79, won the NIT in '89, won the Big East 5 times, National Coach of the Year. He's got a statue in the lobby of a stadium named after him here on campus. So before I go, I would like to hold a small, quick moment of silence for the legendary Hall of Famer Lou Carnesecca. Rest in peace. Lou, you will be missed. Patino's got the program in good hands. Hopefully, we could do something special this year to honor Lou, maybe make a little bit of run. But that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys all for tuning in. Thank you everybody for who tuned in on the YouTube today. Shout out all you guys who were in the chat, everybody who tuned in. I really appreciate it. It means so much to me. Thank you everybody who is listening here on WSJU. My name is Logan. This is the Log Show on WSJU every Tuesday and Thursday from 4 to 5. I will see you guys all on Thursday. See you soon. Peace out.